30 years ago, when I first started speaking in front of audiences, I was afraid of three things. Number one was stuttering. Number two was not pronouncing my words properly. Number three were the fact that people just not liking what I was about to say. Because of evolution, now 30 years later, I'm afraid of three completely different things. Number one, not being able to motivate my audience to do something. Number two, not connecting with my audience. And number three, farting right in the middle of my speech. Come on, you guys. A lot of you men over 50 know what I'm talking about. You know, we lose muscle mass and that clenching of it just doesn't quite get there. But anyhow, in front of my wife, I can blame the dog. And even though she knows it's me, I can still blame it because there's plausible deniability because we all know what those pooches do, right? Greetings, Mr. Toastmaster, fellow Toastmasters, and honored guests. I am going to spend a few minutes tonight talking about motivating your audience. When I say motivating your audience, it could be anything. It could be to climb to the top of their careers, become better humans, or just motivate them to not walk out of your speech. In any event, we're talking kids, employees, friends, anybody. Let me see a show of hands as to how many of you have anxiety about whether or not you would be able to motivate people when the time comes. Come on, be honest. Okay, this is going to be a hard audience because if I can't get you guys to tell the truth, you guys are really going to be tough on me. Come on, raise your hand if you have anxiety about that. Okay, there we go. All right. It's okay. It's normal. It really is. I came across this article recently entitled 5 Powerful Ways to Motivate Your Audience. Don't you just love that? You know, when I'm looking for something on the internet, you'll see 5 powerful ways to leave your lover. 5 powerful ways to be a better person. 10 powerful ways to be more than you can be. 5 powerful ways of how not to fart in public. There's all sorts of ways that you can do, but I just have a ball every time I see this. But in this one article, the first way, it talked about to consider a different approach. And at first thought I was scratching my head. What do you mean consider a different approach? I'm like, how do you know my approach is not right? I mean, you're just assuming that my approach is not going to motivate people. How do you know this? But, you know, I kept reading on and it really talked about putting yourself kind of knowing how this topic has been handled in the past, right? And I started thinking again, well, should I have listened to a whole bunch of speeches about this topic? I'm not going to do that. To me, it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. But it wanted me to see how all the previous speakers had handled this particular topic. Was it successful? Was it not successful? And then that way I could use my powers of the deduction and determine whether or not that this path was going to be. But basically, they just want to get you to think about the approach that you're doing and maybe doing it a little bit differently. So that was number one, right? Number two was to try suspending your expertise. Now, Victor, if you guys know me, that's a hard thing to do because I'm always trying to show my expertise. So suspending it, that was a tough one for me. But when you start to read it, it wanted you to imagine that you were brand new to your field, that you're brand new to the business of whatever it was going to do, and then look at the problem from a neophyte's point of view. What issues would they have? Basically, getting you to put yourself in your audience's shoes. We call that a lot of things. It's called, you can think of it as empathy, you can think of it of all sorts of things. But that later to me, just that whole, not being smart thing was pretty hard to me. I've got some great stories about that. I was at this event and spent a weekend doing this event. And I think I paid $600 or $700 for this 2-day weekend event. And it was supposed to make me more than I was before. And so I sat there all day, and every time this person in front of the room would ask a question, I would raise up my hand. I know. And I would give this really intelligent answer. And then finally, the last time he called on me, he said, that belongs in the advanced class. And I shake down, it belongs in the advanced class. Yeah, that's me. I'm advanced. And he never called on me again. For the rest of that day till midnight, every time I had my hand up, I would be the only one with my hand up, and he would not call on me. I was so frustrated that at the end of the night, I come barreling up to the table, and he's sitting on his director's chair, and I say, why won't you call on me? I came here for Optimum Performance. You won't call on me. You won't do this. This cost me a lot of money. And he's just as calm as day. And he says, why do you need Optimum Performance? I said, because I have this procrastination issue. And if I just get rid of that, I can do this and I can do that and I can be all that I can be. and he said, are you familiar with Einstein theory? I said, yes, I know who Einstein, E equals MC squared, me throwing out some other numbers. And so he went to the board and he goes and he draws a circle. He says, the problem with problems that you have, and he was talking about my procrastination issue, is once you solve this problem, it begets another problem. And then it begets yet another problem. And then it begets another problem. Then it begets another problem. And pretty soon, your space is filled with problems. And it doesn't give you room to create. And, there was more said to it than that, but that was the basic. And I have to tell you, all of my life, I worried about a procrastination issue. And he said this one thing to me. He said, what you need is something bigger than you. And I said, Now, in 30 years previously, I've been worrying about this procrastination issue. And this guy is telling me, you don't have a procrastination issue. You have a problem that's not big enough issue. And he says, if you get a big enough problem, you won't procrastinate. Something that's bigger than you. And my whole world changed in that time period. But that was one example of me being smart. But if I wasn't smart, I never would have got that answer, the answer to my life. The third way that he says is to elicit audience responses. Come up with ways for listeners or online meeting participants to respond. Engage with them. It doesn't matter if it's a dead air, dead vacuum, or cyberspace. It's still something that you don't want to make the audience have to experience. They don't want to have to experience that. So interact with them. The fourth thing was live in your audience's world. And I'm always like, look, this is my world. Why do I live in your world? This is my world. But no, live in your audience's world. Put yourself in their foot. Be with them. And the fifth thing was choose humanity over data. This was just a big crack up to me. Presenters who focus solely on delivering data make two mistakes. First, they allow themselves to be surrounded by data, which diminishes the importance of what you're focused on. And then second, they forget the human to human connection. And when they actually talk to listeners, whether it's in person or online, they hear it. And then suddenly both your attention and the shared characteristics of the activity become much clearer. So to sum this up, if you want to connect with your audience and motivate your audience, one, consider a different approach. Two, try suspending your expertise. Three, elicit audience responses. Four, live in your audience's world. And five, choose humanity over data. If you do those things, you too can be a motivating son of a gun.
Leon, you gave a wonderful looking talk tonight. If you were to turn off the sound and just look at you as you gave your talk, you would have been thoroughly impressed, because you looked like a guy who's smooth. You look like a guy who's delivering really valuable content. I appreciated the early stages of your speech when you had us laughing, particularly the comment about farting. I'm not sure if farting is one of the words that George Carlin says not supposed to be seen on heard on television, but you played it very well. In terms of your talk, you proposed to tell us about motivation, and you're going to share your ideas about motivation. You had lots of content in your speech, from the 3 things that you feared before you started speaking to the 3 things that you now feared, to the story about the person who had the interaction with you when you spent a lot of money for some training. So you had lots of content in your talk. However, since I know you, and you probably won't be surprised to hear this, in order for you to actually be as good as you look, it's going to be necessary to look at your material before 5 minutes to 7. You're just going to have to do that. If you had gotten into your content, you would have been able to structure the speech so that the hook that you want for all your speeches would have been clear. So far, it wasn't. You said a lot of things, and I talked about some of them at the beginning of the evaluation, but in terms of that one main point that you wanted to talk about, motivation, I'm not sure that I would have done it the way that you did it. Since motivation was a problem, the lesson you learned from the guy who told you that each problem begets another problem, I would have structured the speech so that when I asked the audience about motivation and who are nervous about motivation, that could have been a humorous point too, because once they said that they were nervous about motivation, you could have said something along the lines of, well, even if you did solve motivation, you're just going to have another problem. And then go in to talk about the next thing that would happen as a result of solving the motivation problem. You're growing as a speaker. You look real good as a speaker. You look sharp. Your lighting was good. And you actually carried off a speech that someone else had done the speech, it wouldn't have been as impactful as the fact that you did the speech. I want to see you do the speech again, and I want to see you take the information, the data that you had in the speech, and I want to see you reorganize it so that you have the hook of motivation, and then use all the other stories in the speech to lead us towards that hook. Until next time, have a good time.